time, it looked as if that less than 50% of the people in America attend religious services, which is the first time since I've been alive, probably the first time since this country's even been a country that that's happened. Why is that happening? And what can the church do to reach that?
Hello and welcome to Switching Sides. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at an episode of Reaching the Next Generation, hosted by Pastor Chip Bennett. As the title of the show suggests, it's an ongoing series which focuses on drawing younger people into the church with the aim of converting them and keeping young people in the church by protecting them against whatever forces are responsible for losing them. In this particular episode, Chip will be talking to Dr. Dale Coulter, who is a church historian. Dr. Coulter will be using his historical expertise to comment on the reason Christianity is on the decline in the West, and also on his ideas as to what might reduce this decline and retain Christians. You may be able to see from what I just said why this might be of interest to a person like myself, who studies religious conversion and deconversion. Dr. Coulter makes some interesting observations in this video. I'd like to comment on these. Some of his observations my research agrees with, and some my research distinctly disagrees with. Let's take a look.
I were to tell you what I think Christianity is going to look like in 2050, I'd say it's global Pentecostal charismatic and Catholic. And when I say global Pentecostal charismatic, I'm including the rise of all this non-denominationalism, many of which are charismatic. And that's a broad term. You could be light, you could be heavy, but it's all this focus on spirituality. And I think churches that are going to be effective and catch that wave, they're going to be focused on spiritual life.
Now, what you just heard was the money quote for this video, for me at least. What Dr. Coulter here does is to form a connection between Pentecostalism and Catholicism, intersecting very specifically at the level of spirituality. My research makes this identical connection, and it's not a connection I've seen in any of the literature so far. What is the significance of this connection to deconversion research? Well, it seems to be having the opposite result of what he's predicting. The largest number of reported deconversions I've seen so far in my research comes specifically from those two denominations. I'll discuss the reason for that later in this video, but first let's address his prediction. The first thing Dr. Coulter observes in this conversation was that mainline Protestant denominations are on the decline, and the data seem to bear this out pretty clearly. As a result, he makes the seemingly reasonable conclusion that the churches which do not conform to the mainline Protestant denominations will survive, which seems to be a reasonable conclusion. Where he falls short in my informed opinion is to reduce all churches outside the mainline Protestantism to either Pentecostal or Catholic. Now, this may be a result of him being a Pentecostal himself, which he is. But Pentecostalism and Catholicism are both marked by a sort of spiritualism, which looks distinctly different between the two, but that not all denominational churches maintain. There's something specific and unique about Pentecostalism, which may help to explain why it is one of the two churches producing the most deconverts. But let's consider his point. He says that these two churches will weather the secularization of the West and make it to the other side while other churches are dying off. With the Catholic Church, I think we have good precedent for this. Catholicism has proven remarkably resilient and is the longest living church alongside Eastern Orthodoxy. But what Pentecostalism? Well, As I've said, Pentecostalism is hurting when it comes to deconversion. But the dying off of the Western Church is not a result of a lot of people becoming atheists. While the number of atheists in the West is definitely on the rise, the biggest trend we see is people disaffiliating from religion, meaning they stop making religion any part of their life. Rather than maintaining a position and focus on religion, as is the case with atheists, they simply drop it altogether and do other things. These are the sorts of people that, when polled about their religion, do not answer by saying, "Well, I'm now an atheist." Instead, they will check the none of the above box, labeling themselves as nuns. So whereas these churches are a driver when it comes to deconversion, could they end up retaining the nuns? I have no data to say either way. Coulter's argument is that people are starving for spirituality, and so they are pursuing various New Age or pagan practices. If these highly spiritualistic churches fill that void, it will retain these people. I'm skeptical about that claim, but I cannot prove or disprove it with evidence. What I can say is that even if these churches retain the nuns, they will also increase the number of deconverts if they become the two major churches in the world, based on all available data.
So I would say what we need is a comprehensive vision that gets at the spirituality, that meets people there. People want to experience the power and presence of God. They want to know that God is invested heavily.
So here Coulter claims that people want spirituality. That may or may not be the case. However, I can tell you that this high focus on spirituality is one of the 5 religious modes I've identified as being present in the religious background of deconverts. When it comes to deconversion, spiritualism takes a toll. To illustrate this point, let me play a clip from Jerry DeWitt. DeWitt was a former Pentecostal pastor for many years and of many churches. He eventually deconverted and is now an atheist activist. Here's how he describes his experience growing up in Pentecostalism.
You know as well as I know that being raised in that type of environment is kind of like having a small rock, a little rock if you will, being put into the shoe of your mind, that no matter where you step, you feel it. You feel it with every single step. But unfortunately, with this particular rock, people sometimes find a way just to adapt to it, and they just consider it to be natural, regardless of the type of psychological pain that it may cause them or the discomfort it may cause them. And I think because it is with you every step of the way throughout your life, if you've been raised religious, you just think that's the way it is, that all mental shoes come with a rock in them. And it took me literally 25 years of being the guy who was attempting to put rocks in people's shoes for me to realize that that was not natural. That is not the default position of being a human being.
You being a Pentecostal scholar, and I grew up Pentecostal, I'm of the opinion that a lot of what needs to be going on in our church is the power of God. That
There are 2 ways in which spiritualism play into deconversion. The first is that when a person sees the world as primarily driven by spiritual forces, exposure to education and science is a more potent discourager of religious belief. Because as one's worldview begins to shift to make the world function according to natural laws, and one begins to view the world through the lens of science, their former Christian mode of thinking becomes to look untenable. The second way in which spiritualism is a driver of deconversion is a lack of spiritual experiences, meaning that if one expects to have numinous experiences, such as ecstatic religious feelings, answered prayers, and miracles, and these decline or cease, then one's religion is not fulfilling the expectations it has set. When the world does not behave in the way that religion has told them it ought to behave, religion starts to look very shaky or wrong.
Now, if I'm raised in that sort of environment where my understanding of Christianity is this is how we support these political causes, these moral, what we deem to be moral causes, social causes, that sort of thing, eventually I might ask the question, well, do I need to believe these things in order to do this? No, I don't.
So here he makes the point that as the church has become more social activist-minded, it has become less relevant in the world. And this is a good observation. An excellent example of this would be Ryan Bell. For my viewers who can remember back a few years, Ryan Bell was the former pastor who got a lot of media attention around 2014 for his Year Without God stunt. Bell was raised and then pastored in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is a pretty fundamentalistic church in a number of ways. Bell began to migrate in a more permissive direction and eventually got his church involved in social programs and activism. He was removed from his pastor position by his denomination and was left without a church. So now Bell is working shoulder to shoulder with humanists and atheists on social justice causes. He and his atheist friends have all the same goals and causes, and they ask him why he needed God to do what he was doing. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that he didn't, and he deconverted. Bell's story has similarities to the stories of quite a few deconverts, so Dr. Coulter has made a correct observation here.
Country, when they're polled, they say that the church is aligned with a political organization. They're known more for that than they are a lot of the other stuff.
So
This is the final observation we'll look at in the video. The view that the church is inseparable from the political right wing is definitely a driver keeping people from associating with the church. And in the data I've collected, if you combine objections to the right-wing associations of Christianity, its sexual ethics, and its racial disparities, you see politics as one of the objections given with the highest frequency by people who are undergoing deconversion. So once again, Dr. Coulter has raised a valid point. And that is all for this episode of Switching Sides. Thanks for watching.